Welcome to your UCLA Alumni Association Town Hall. I am your president, D'Artagnan Scorza, a class of 2007 and 2013. It is such a pleasure to be here with all of you tonight. You know, we began hosting these town halls well over a year ago with the intention to bring you the latest updates about what's happening on our campus and what's happening in our UCLA community. These town halls have served as a space for our alums, as well as our faculty and staff and students to get to learn more about each other, but to also understand, what's happening in our world around us, especially given what's occurring in the pandemic. So in tonight's town hall, I'm incredibly excited to welcome each of you to this very special topic that we're going to talk about tonight, also commonly now known as the Great Resignation. You know, many talk about the Great Resignation, which in our time started in early 2021, as a workforce protest of organizations that breed and reward toxic individuals and a hustle culture. And so as people, sort of began to get tired by this culture, they decided to leave those workplaces. Those resigning from their workplace, range from entry level to mid-career professionals, and in some cases, CEOs are voluntarily walking away from their careers. I can even tell you here in the state of California, we've had a number of state legislators that have resigned over the course of the past 2 years with vacancies that are opening up in our political offices. These work environments are typically plagued by drama, and not always, but they're places with employees who have often faced challenges are deciding to leave and not sort of stay in that workplace or even stay in the workforce. One of the other things that has been very clear during this time that we've experienced in the pandemic is the role that isolation has played and the need to strengthen mental health. Mental health has become a considerable contributor and factor that also explains why employees voluntarily leave their job. Collectively, many employees have decided that they've not received enough compensation and they want a work-life balance that addresses their individual situation. They also reject the idea that mistreatment of employees as they quote unquote pay their dues or rise up the ranks is an acceptable workplace culture or even practice, or that you have to give up your life to be successful, right? That you have to sort of, work yourself into burnout. I would also note, and we're going to hear more about this tonight, that women are leading the way, quitting at a rate that's far higher than their male counterparts. This could be due to women having a higher percentage of the burden of child or even elder care issues. But tonight we've invited 3 incredible guests to join us in this conversation. Caroline Nahas, Caroline, you can come on the camera. Katya Daniel and Jerry Nickelsburg have joined us to talk about the Great Resignation. Caroline has held multiple roles at Korn Ferry, which is a human capital professional services firm, currently serving as the first woman partner, as well as a vice chairman. Caroline has interviewed, hired, and managed countless professionals over the course of her career. She's currently chair at the UCLA Anderson School of Management and is a proud Bruin in the class of 1970. Katya is the head of talent acquisition at Golden Hippo, which is a leader in direct-to-consumer marketing of health, beauty, and pet care brands. She has extensive experience in global talent acquisition and human resources across multiple industries, tech, health tech, and higher ed. Her specialties include high-growth hiring, employer branding, and recruiting process design, and she's interviewed and hired thousands of candidates throughout her career. So students, make sure you're paying attention to our incredible guest and panelists tonight. In 2019, she received the UCLA Young Alumnus of the Year Award, and she was in the Bruin class of 2008. Welcome again, Katya. Finally joining us tonight is Jerry Nickelsburg. Jerry is an adjunct full professor at UCLA Anderson School of Management, and he serves as the faculty director of Anderson Forecast, and plays a key role in the economic modeling and forecasting of the national, state, and regional economic analyses. His current research encompasses transportation and environmental economics and the relationships between highly skilled persons and their demand for social insurance. Welcome, all three of you as our panelists tonight. Thank you for joining us. Now, if you are interested in being a part of today's conversation, we invite you to send your questions, send your emails to us, or even go ahead and post or you can check out the chat where details to send your question in will be provided. You can send your comments and or your questions to the panelists to Christine Werlich, and her email address is KWERLINICH, Christine Werlich, KWERLINICH at support.ucla.edu. We will gladly welcome your questions and we'll pass them along to our panelists. So now that I've done the introduction, let's go ahead and get started tonight. So this is for any one of you. And I mentioned before we got started tonight, we really want this to be a great dialogue that opens up an opportunity for those that have joined us tonight to get to understand this issue and this topic. So, you know, why do you all think this is occurring? I mean, I gave some framing, but why is the Great Resignation occurring today? I mean, from your perspective, why do you see this happening? Katya, how about you go ahead and open us up?
Sure. I think that there's, and this is a topic that's come up even at our company town hall, because, everyone sort of wants to understand. And I think that, part of it is it's a greater sort of cultural movement. And I think the pandemic had a lot to do with it. People spend a lot of time in isolation, and you are sort of faced with your own mortality, right? And I think that a lot of, because of COVID, right? So you don't know what's going to happen necessarily. So much change, a lot of social change. And I think people had a lot of time to reflect on, am I happy? Am I happy at work? Am I fulfilled? Do my personal values align with this organization? And, I think especially having this blend of work and life, and you're just kind of at home with your computer and, back-to-back calls, you start thinking and reflecting. And I think a lot of people had an opportunity to reflect and maybe realize that, hey, either this career path isn't right for me and I'm going to go do something else. And I have a lot of friends who chose to do that, whether it's go back to school or pursue something different. And then a lot of people realize that, hey, this company, and, to your point, that hustle culture, or maybe not a healthy work environment, they decided that, hey, this isn't working for me and I can find something else. And there are opportunities out there. So I think it's a combination of factors that all sort of combined at this perfect storm. And I think that people just had, I look at it more of a reevaluation. People really reevaluated, reassessed their lives, their priorities, and, work is a huge part of our lives. So people reevaluated what that means to them.
That's incredible. Thank you. Go ahead, Jerry.
I think Katya is right. It is a perfect storm. And the way I'd like to characterize it is, it's a perfect storm of really four great resignations. And they have different motivations. There is the great retirement of boomers. So in 2008, we had a big recession, and people who were planning on retiring and using equity in their homes found they had no equity in their homes. So they stayed in the workforce, and the labor force participation rate amongst boomers kept increasing, and everyone was commenting on it. Well, now they're 10 years older and have equity in their homes. And so we've seen millions of boomers drop out of the labor force. They're ready to retire. And then there are also the factors that Katya spoke about. There are people who are reevaluating and moving to different careers. There are people who are, so that's a second. The third is people who are in fields where they're in high demand, and they're finding that they can get pay raises, they can move to jobs that they really want to do compared to what they're doing. And then the fourth, which D'Artagnan, you suggested earlier, is that there's a continuation of a long trend of parents dropping out of the labor force, and particularly women, in order to raise children. And this big bow wave of millennials are at the point where they're starting to have children. So you have all those things happening at the same time. And I think it's exactly right that the pandemic was sort of a spark that induced all of this to happen.
So I would agree that you've covered just about everything. I would just highlight the market forces that are going on, and Jerry mentioned it, but the market has never heated up like it has now. And I fear a little bit that people are reacting rather than thinking through. So yes, there are some that are doing it thoughtfully, and maybe they had the 2 years to think about it. But I think the other is that companies are coming after people aggressively 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, and each time are sweetening the pot. And I'm not sure that everybody's thoughtfully really thinking through what they're moving to, as much as that they are just lured into another opportunity. And they probably haven't really thoroughly asked the right questions that you referred to, Katya, in terms of what is the environment, and really sourcing that before they've made the moves, because I think they're just really captivated by flattery that they've been approached 2 or 3 times. Oftentimes it's a technology company where it's really exciting for some people. And then they get into a situation and they find out sometimes that that situation isn't any better than what they had before. And they ran to rather than running, or they ran, instead of running from, they ran to. And so I think that's a really important factor to think about.
You know, Caroline, that's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I was talking to one of our fellow UCLA alumni board members, and she mentioned that, you know, she runs a practice, and she mentioned that she had to pay people to come to interview with her, right? So are you all finding, like, is it that much of a demand? Like, what are you all seeing out there in the field?
Yeah, so there's a lot of enticements. Companies are paying, you know, it's not just the higher salaries, it's also they're getting signing bonuses, and these are people that typically wouldn't necessarily get a signing bonus. And to Jerry's point, it depends on what sector we're talking about, but I'm going to use financial analysts, people in technology, financial reporting. We're seeing just doing anything to get people to come over, and they're not even sure it's going to stick. It's just that they need to fill positions, and they're doing it really rapidly. And again, I would only point to, if we're going to talk about culture and what people are really looking for, that they need to really step back and thoughtfully think about what they're doing, and don't just go by what the recruiter, and of course I am a recruiter, so I'm not talking about me, but the person with whom they're speaking at the company is apt to paint a very rosy picture about the opportunity. And I would suggest strongly, here you have the UCLA Alumni Network, you have LinkedIn. Go into LinkedIn, work the network, and see who has worked at those companies, either is still there or has left, and find out what they say about the business conditions of the company. That's really important.
Oh, that's incredible. Katya?
Yeah, I actually want to comment on that, because I agree with Caroline 100%. Is I do think that sometimes people they're running from somewhere, that maybe was dysfunctional or, lacked psychological safety or something like that. And they're enticed by this sign-on bonus and this higher salary, and maybe they're not evaluating the role. And so, I haven't heard of people having to pay to interview, and God, I hope it doesn't move in that direction for my sake. But what I would encourage people to do is exactly kind of what Caroline is saying is, there's so many ways you can find out about a company culture. Don't just trust the recruiter, and that would be me, that would be a member of my team. But, go on Comparably, go on Glassdoor, really research. If the reason you're making a move is because you are trying to find somewhere that maybe aligns closer with who you are, and that's your driver, then dig into those things, right? Because there are a lot of companies who, will distract you with these flashy bonuses or this, that, and the other. But, I find that what people are really looking for, and I think it's changed, the kind of questions we get from candidates has changed a lot. And they're asking a lot more about diversity and inclusion. They're asking more questions about what are the different policies, what's the work-life balance like. And, for us, that, for me, I also changed jobs during this time. So I also am part of that Great Resignation. And some of the questions that I asked were those questions, right? I took a look at the tenure. How long had people been there? What are employees saying on Glassdoor and Comparably? What's sort of the feedback? And that's what I would encourage people to do, because, there are a lot of recruiters out there, and they'll pay you more and you'll get a sign-on bonus, but is it really better? I don't know. But, if you don't do your due diligence, then it might not be.
That's really interesting. I have to add, I made a transition as well. I changed during the pandemic. I founded an organization and left, and then went to work for government. And so it's really interesting because I also see many folk. I just hired, a number of staff in my own shop, and a lot of folk were just ready for a new challenge or a different experience, or even more pay, right? I mean, I think, we're seeing across the board that people are coming in with a sort of a number of interests. And I guess what really is what I'm curious about, and some of the questions that we've gotten from folks leading up to today is, how empowered are employees starting to feel, or what are you all seeing out there? How are they approaching companies now, or better yet, how should they approach companies to get the type of job that they may be, vying to get?
Well, I think, one of the things is, and I don't think we can lose sight of this, regardless of the Great Resignation and the point in time we're in, is that nothing is going to replace hard work. Nothing is going to replace somebody thinking that they can make a contribution to a company and that they are fully engaged in their present. That presence may have a different now dynamic than it did before, meaning they may work differently and they're looking for a company that can be flexible about that. The remote versus the in-person or the hybrid or whatever that company or companies are. And by the way, everybody's working through that right now. Nobody has the perfect silver bullet for that. But I think it is important for them to feel that they can ask the questions, but it isn't just the question you ask, it's how you ask it. Mm-hmm. So if they're asking a question that's kind of, can you tell me about the culture? And then listen to how the person describes the culture, and then probe further. Well, how does that really manifest itself? Who are the employees who have been most successful in your environment? What are their traits? And then listen to that and say, do those traits match mine? Mm-hmm. If someone says, well, they work 24/7, they're available at all times, at every hour, we text them constantly, they're really fantastic, you're in the wrong environment. If they say we respect each other, we have an environment of support and inclusion. There are times, let's say they say there are times during this period of time, because of the business we're in, that we have to flex up a little bit more. I like that because they're being honest. They're not painting a perfect panacea. So though, just asking those kind of questions and then saying, if someone is exiting the position they're taking, why did that person leave? So let's see what that recruiter or the people say. And tell me a little bit about the person to whom I'd be reporting. What would people say about their management style? So those are the kinds of things I would ask. I don't think it's empowerment as much as anybody has a right. They should have been asking those kind of questions before. You have a right to, but I call it not an empowerment, it's just that those are the kind of questions they should probe.
Katya and Jerry, I want to hear your response to this too, but I do want to lift up this idea that the Great Resignation is in some ways calling into question power dynamics, right? There is a power dynamic issue. I mean, if you're going to interview for a job and you need to get that job, you need to land that job, maybe you don't feel as comfortable asking those questions, right? Or even now, folk are like, no, I'm demanding more pay, or I want more work-life balance. Is that not a factor that's starting to show up? And Katya, Jerry, what are your thoughts?
So, I think Carolyn said something really important, which is companies are working through this now. And we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we're still in a pandemic. So just to take, for example, someone who says, I want to go with a particular company because they're going to allow me to work from home. You should think through, how long is that going to last? Who is going to get the promotion? What will my career path be? What kind of job do I have? Are they going to call me back sooner than later? Because, we see right now companies saying work from home. Well, we had to do it. We thought it was great, but there are real advantages to being in the office, and we're calling people back. And you all remember the experiment that Yahoo did of work from home that didn't work in the grand scheme. So some people will and some won't. So keep in mind that this is a time of very tight labor markets, and it won't always be tight labor markets. So what you get today might well change in the particular job unless you kind of explore that.
I think, D'Artagnan, to your point, though, I do see it as empowerment. I think it, in my opinion, right? I actually do think that the power dynamics of the employer-employee relationship have shifted. And I think that perhaps that is, maybe a necessary change. I think that in many ways, what I've seen as trends in HR and talent acquisition is taking a closer look at employee engagement and employee feedback. And those things are very highly valued, maybe more so than they were in the past, or at least more so than, I experienced earlier on in my career. I think that companies in this time of change, or at least, the good companies, have also taken a look and thought, how can we do better, right? How can we do better for our employees so that we can retain our employees? And those are the companies that aren't being hit as hard by, these mass resignations, because they have adapted, right? They have adapted to the shifting dynamics, and they've recognized that, happy employees do better work, they stay with the company. And so we should be hearing their feedback. And, but I do agree with Caroline on the point that these are questions that maybe we should have always asked, but at the same time, I don't think everyone feels comfortable. If you need a job, right? You're not going to come into that interview asking, all the hard questions, but if you know that you have potentially options, you will feel a little bit more empowered to ask some of those questions. And yes, ask those questions respectfully. But I think that what's changed in the market is there are possibly multiple opportunities. So candidates are feeling more comfortable about asking about the things that are important to them. And, still, I wouldn't recommend, first question, first interview, hey, what's your work-life balance like? Be thoughtful about it, you are there to work. But, but I do think it's okay to, ask about the feedback culture. Like I know at our company, for example, we have town hall meetings where we have a suggestion box, and every single one is read out loud, every suggestion, and those are some things that, a level of transparency that maybe companies didn't have, or at least I didn't see, 10, plus years ago when I started my career. And so I think companies, the dynamic has shifted, and companies are adapting and trying to think more about, about employee wellness. And I think a lot of it has also been the aspects of social change. How can employees bring their whole selves to work? How can we support that? And so that has been a change on the employer side as well, and a positive one, I would say.
So, this one's for you, Professor. When we think about the Great Resignation, and we're talking about things like inflation, and now we're hearing about Ukraine and the impact on our economy, what does this mean for us and our future prospects? What does forecasting look like for our economy, given what's occurring and all the political dynamics that are at play right now?
Well, first of all, it means that forecasting is more difficult today because there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. The one thing, and we're talking about labor markets, and there's much less uncertainty there, but certainly there's a lot of uncertainty in the international environment. That is, in some sense, really beneficial for the American worker because reliance on a foreign workforce is riskier today. But kind of to your point, we've got inflation, we have turmoil in Europe, war in Europe. And what does that mean? It means more uncertainty. And from companies' points of view, especially companies that are involved in international trade and international finance, it may mean being more cautious in their expansion plans.
So Caroline, Katya, how are you seeing companies deal with the uncertainty that Jerry just mentioned?
So having these companies dealt with the last 2 years in terms of no playbook, total uncertainty, social unrest, I would say that they're dealing pretty well. And it's only because they've been sensitized. And the 2 years were the roughest, I think, that most executives had ever been through because they'd never experienced anything like this, and having to shift, as Katya mentioned earlier, just shift your complete way of doing business. So we'll put it on the company side of having to pivot immediately, not just quickly, immediately, to a workforce that had been coming into the office on a regular basis and a kind of a rhythm that they had for years and years and years, to a completely different rhythm, communicating constantly with their employees, if they were good, to just be honest and say, here's where we are, here's what we're working through. We need all of you to let us know what you need, but also we need everybody to work as hard as they can right now just to keep us going until we kind of find out exactly how we're going to operate. So I think they've all adjusted. I would say too, I wanted to reference, and it ties to what Katya was saying about the leadership development and the things people are looking for. The companies that are doing well are the companies that already had a foundation in many of these things. So it wasn't, we've painted most companies as being terrible, and your introduction, Dart, what are terrible places. There's a lot of companies that are good places to work, but they're working harder to be even better. And they're going on these listening tours and trying to find out what are employees feeling, what are their needs, knowing that you can't meet everybody's needs. You can't make everybody happy at every time, but you can develop, create, or revitalize programs that you had and shift to accommodate some of the things that are occurring in the workplace. So I think companies are striving to do that. The ones that it's really hard for are the ones that had basically nothing before there was, no foundation from which they could work. But our company,
Caroline, what do you mean when you say foundation, by the way, for the benefit of our audience? When you say they had a foundation or they didn't have one, do you mean policies? Do you mean practices? Do you mean culture?
They had
what do you mean?
Policies, they had procedures, they had processes. And let's say I'm going to use leadership development or development of people as an example. They had processes in place. They might have been now a little bit outdated because we've got a changing workforce now. And if you want to use the word empowerment, where people feel that they can ask for more things. So a company has to try to balance what the needs are of the bulk of their employees with a healthy business as well, because if you don't have a healthy business, you can't create some of these things for people to thrive. flexibility. So that's what I mean by foundations. But if a company really was promising a lot of things, never delivered, they talk, a lot of lip service about we develop our employees, we give them all sorts of opportunities, and 3 years later, those same employees are in the same jobs, working as hard as they did before, and nothing's really occurred. So it's processes, practices, policies, and genuine, authentic leadership and engagement with those. So not a lot of lip service.
Incredible. Katya?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with what Caroline said. I think that probably the last couple of years have been, the hardest that most executives or definitely most HR leaders could possibly imagine, right? Because those are the people who are developing the policies and the different procedures around, do we return to work, and do people feel comfortable coming back in with COVID, or, how do we survey, how do we balance, all of these requests with budgets, right? We can't make everybody happy. So I think that, I think the companies that will continue to be successful are the ones that are, that are authentic, that communicate, maybe over communicate with their employees, right? About, here's what's going on, here's how the business is doing. And I think that sharing that with their employees and, being honest about, hey, we don't know, there's a lot we don't know, but we're working on figuring it out. And that applies to whether it's some uncertainty about aspects of the business, or some uncertainty about social change that's going on, or uncertainty about the pandemic, right? Sometimes it's, a good leadership quality to say, look, we don't have all the answers. It's better to be honest and say, we don't know, but we are really working on figuring it out. And, let's figure it out together, because we want your feedback. And, through that, we can kind of figure it out. And I think it's just like kind of a shared accountability. And I think that is what will make some companies get through this period stronger than they were before.
Well, let's talk about this period, because I think, we've been in a pandemic. Some are arguing, we obviously started with an epidemic and moved to become a pandemic. Now some are talking about, us moving into an endemic period of time, right? Where, the virus is a part of our, regular lives, but not everyone feels safe going back into the workplace. Not everyone feels safe, working in an environment around other folks. So how is our current pandemic and eventually our, this period that we're moving into, shaping the workforce? So how is it shaping the way in which employers are reacting to employees as well?
That's actually an interesting one, because I think that, it's brought up a lot of conversations for a lot of companies about, they were traditionally an in-person company, and then, immediately had to shift to being remote. And a lot of people weren't prepared for that. And then I think that now the question is, do people come back? Is it hybrid? How do we change the work model? And a lot of it depends on how successful, the company results were in that period, right? And some companies did better remote. I mean, a lot of workers ended up working much more when they were remote, because there was no break, right? You're just there with your laptop, and that kind of led to a level of burnout. And so I think, like, where is it going? I'm not, I think that that's something that everyone is sort of trying different things at this point to see what will work. And I think some companies are trying maybe 4-day work weeks, or, I don't know if that's necessarily going to work, or having flexible work arrangements. And, there's so many factors to it, because even if some people come in, right, then what are the benefits for the employees that do come in? Enhanced face time. Does that mean that they'll be more in line for promotion, right? Like, there's so many different factors to, to changing the model. But I think that right now, I sense that the hybrid model will likely be here to stay for a, continued period of time, because I think that there are too many companies offering remote hybrid arrangements that if we were to just go back full time, I think that, those companies might struggle to retain employees.
So one of the things that, and you hit the nail on the head from the standpoint of being honest again with the employees, to say, look, we're going to work through models. Here's what we're proposing right now. And if it's a proposing where people would be in the office 2 to 3 days a week and remote the other 2, that's a possibility. We are thinking at Korn Ferry of putting a little more structure around it from the standpoint of the teams coming in at the same time. So if you're working in a particular team, we're going to try to say this team would be coming in on Mondays and Tuesdays. This team would be coming in on Wednesdays and Thursdays. The other thing about, and it really relates to what kind of business you're in. We're in the professional services business. Our assets, we have 2 major assets, real estate and people. So it's a very people-intensive business. We're not making anything. And so most of the people in our profession really thrive on interaction, and they thrive on getting together in a group and thinking through things. So we're trying to promote that kind of coming back to the office on a staggered basis. But the other part about professional services, and I don't know if Jerry and Katya would have addressed this, but for us, we have partners. And what we don't want partners, and then we have people who are senior associates and moving up to partner. We have support. And what we don't want to do is make it so the partners can kind of come in anytime they want to. And the other people are not, because we want it integrated, number 1. And number 2, we're on an apprentice system where a lot of learning takes place, looking at each other and saying after a meeting, what could we have done differently? What did you learn from that? So it's complicated in terms of what we're all going to do. It's exciting actually and very intellectually stimulating to think about it, but we got to put some kind of a structure to it, or else we're just going to have people kind of drifting in and out.
That's incredible. I want to get to an equity issue here soon, because we've talked about this period of unrest, but I know folk from the audience have been really curious, right? Because we're talking about the Great Resignation, and obviously we're talking about this paradigm, but folk want to know, like, hey, if I'm considering resigning, if I am, either maybe a person that's hiring, right? What guidance would you offer to those individuals if you wanted to make this career change yourself? You're ready to move on, start something new. What would you say to that person? And if you were, an employer, here we have many alumni who are here with our town hall tonight that employ individuals. What would you recommend to them for to welcome in those individuals who are looking to make those transitions?
I mean, I can, probably speak to it from both sides, I suppose. But I think from the employer side, I think that the best, piece of advice, because it is such a hot market and there's so many other jobs, and you have to figure out ways to differentiate yourself from these other employers. And I think a big part of it is, figure out what makes your company unique. Like, what is your employer value proposition? What are you offering that these other companies aren't? And I think that a big part of it is also, find out what your employer brand is authentically and make sure that that's communicated out and that candidates feel that throughout the entire candidate experience, because that part really matters. If you don't have a great candidate experience, you're probably going to have a terrible employee experience. That's the reality of it. If this isn't the first impression and that doesn't go well, then, it's probably not looking well for the future. So I think, that's one thing that I, would always highlight, from a recruiting standpoint. And then I think, just for employers to also understand it's a two-way street. They're interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them. And so be mindful of it being kind of a fit both ways, and I think really understand what's important to the candidate. And I think for candidates, I think that to kind of what Caroline mentioned earlier, do your due diligence, like make sure you've really thought about the company that you're joining, and does it really resonate with you? And don't just, it's easy to say, don't just think about the money, but, think about this is going to be a career move. And I think that, advice I wish had been given to me earlier on in my career is like, really think about who your manager is going to be, right? And for me, especially that's a big part of what defines your career. And, for me, one of the driving forces to me to accept the job that I did was who I'd be working for, and I think that you want to have a manager who's going to support you and grow your career, and think about some of those things, not just the things about like, what kind of company is it? Is it flashy? Am I making a lot of money? Those things. Yeah, that's great. But at the end of the day, if what we're hearing more, I think, from people who are participating in the Great Resignation, a lot of it is about feeling fulfilled, feeling fulfilled in the work that you do, and feeling like you are belong in the environment that you're in. So, make sure if you want to make a move, think about your true reasons why, and make sure that those are the things you interview the company on when you're going through the process.
Yeah, that's incredible. Caroline.
So a lot of the things Katya said, I kind of outlined what some of the questions would be earlier about the kinds of things that you would ask if you are a potential employee. And also, don't forget, I said, access people you know and trust, and ask them, use people as a sounding board. I mean, I cannot tell you, and I've loved, I haven't loved COVID, but I have loved a lot of the things where people would reach to me and say, can I just think out loud with you? And a lot of the people that at one time might have been with Korn Ferry and have moved on, who I spent time with, or even students now, because of my affiliation with Anderson, who will call up and say, can I just brainstorm with you? I have this opportunity. Here's what I'm wrestling with. What do you think? And I never tell them what to do, but I've said, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Is this a company that you would have targeted to begin with? Or is it, again, just this transaction, this one-time situation that came to your attention and you're going to it rather than thoughtfully thinking through it? So, and then the last thing that you highlighted a little bit, Katya, is purpose and mission of the company. There's a lot of discussion right now about the environment, about social, about governments, ESG, and so much going around. But what's important to you? And purpose can be you personally, and it's very personal. What's important to me? My family, my friends, having a work-life balance, or do I have aspirations and ambitions that are different than that? You need to kind of analyze yourself and go through that introspection, and then project that onto a company. And so you ask them, what is your mission and purpose? And what do you do beyond, work? Is there something that you're doing in the community? And ask them about that if it's important to you. If it isn't, I wouldn't ask it just to ask it. But there are many people that are very conscious right now of purpose, of company. Are they doing something within their company, or are they thinking it at a lot more world scale? So I would also suggest that they probe that again if it's important to them.
Now, I have a question for all of you. And, you've mentioned it a few times on this call, right? We talked about the social unrest that's occurred. We talked about questions that employees are asking about purpose and diversity, equity, and inclusion. But, but for so many people, prior to the Great Resignation, they were having a hard time entering into the labor, the workforce anyway, right? They didn't have economic opportunities. They were unable to really access jobs. So even with this demand, right, are we seeing diversity increase? Are we seeing companies be more equitable? Are we seeing them build a pipeline to bring folk that may not have had opportunities to enter into the workforce? Jerry, what say you? I mean, are you seeing companies work to train the new employees and open up opportunities? What's happening right now out there in the field?
So I think that's right, that companies are investing more in their employees. It's something that they can sell. But what we see in the macro level is that companies are reaching into a potential labor force that they hadn't reached into before. So people who have less experience, people who might have been incarcerated. And so we're seeing more opportunity for those who were lacking an opportunity, say in 2012 to 2019. So that's really a good development, and it's strictly a function of our labor force has shrunk. And so companies that want to grow, have to look for people. So for example, we see in manufacturing a great demand for workers and not much of a new supply. So they're going in and hiring folks that they might not have interviewed before, training them and giving them that opportunity.
Incredible. Katya, Caroline, what are you all seeing? Are you seeing equity issues emerge in the workplace and the workforce? Are you seeing, what role is diversity and inclusion playing now in all of this?
Yeah.
Or what role is it not playing? That's also an important question.
Yeah, I think that what I've seen and been really pleased to see, I think that a lot of companies, during this time have, whether forced or recognizing that it's the right thing, have started to either create a DEI program if they didn't have one, or build upon it, right? And I think that it has, put this topic at the forefront, whereas maybe it wasn't before. And I think that a lot of companies now, especially, good companies that you'd want to work for, right, are doing, an internal equity analysis, right? So they're taking a look at compensation. They are taking a look at hiring practices, right? And taking a look at, are these equitable hiring practices? How can we make them more equitable? How can this be more fair? Or they're taking a look at, where are we recruiting from? Are we, are our jobs visible to different types of populations? How can we, reach a broader applicant pool? And then I think also, really thinking about the inclusivity of language in job descriptions, right? Even some of those things, you look at job descriptions and, the language isn't always, necessarily very inclusive. And so I think that there's a lot and it's really exciting, to be in talent acquisition at a time when some of these things are happening, because it's important to, it's always been important. And I think that now, a lot of times now executive teams realize it's important, and that's exciting. And so I think that companies are, what I'm seeing, or, at least what I experience at the company that I work for, is that it is something that's at the forefront. And we are thinking about different ways, because it's not just about diversity, right? It's also about inclusion and belonging. And so I think that a lot of companies used to focus on, well, how can we just get more diversity? And it's like, okay, that's like maybe step one, right? Like, I think that it's a lot more about, once you have a more diverse employee population, how are you ensuring that the environment is inclusive and they feel a sense of belonging so that you retain them, right? That's the important part. It's not just hiring a diverse applicant, it's having a culture that is supportive to, in a way that everyone feels like they can bring their whole self to work. So I think we've seen a big shift, and there, sure, there's going to be some companies out there that it's just lip service, right? And they're just going to hire a DEI director and put all the responsibility onto them and say, okay, yeah, fix it. But the companies that do well and that have truly good intentions, right, are the ones that recognize it's a company-wide effort. It is something that everybody owns and everybody takes accountability for.
It used to be too that development of people, coaching, mentoring was left to the people that had that in their DNA. So there were certain individuals that you always turned to and said, Caroline, will you take, 5 of these individuals, whether, and I'm talking about could be diverse candidates or could be just in general. I'm talking about attitude and kind of how you approach things. Now the companies are shifting. Everybody is accountable for this, not just the few that happen to really like it and be good at it and let the other people skate and put the burden on just 50% or even 40% of the leaders in the company or the managers in the company. So it's across the board now. They're being held accountable, and that's because people now are front and center. That doesn't say that they weren't important before, because there are many companies that treated people well, et cetera, but it's been ratcheted up because of what's transpired in the last 2 years, where people are getting much more introspective, and also, as we all have been talking about, the Great Resignation. So it has to be embedded in a company and sustained in a company, not just a transaction here or a program here, but something throughout where people are held accountable. And that also means that they're compensated. Part of their compensation is driven by absolute metrics, not just, oh yeah, I recruited one person or I did, but things that, a sustained metric and improvement every year. It has to be very, very intentional.
That's incredible. And I really appreciate you all lifting that up. And actually, I think something that folk in our, in our audience time, I want to know is, yeah, I mean, we're talking about recruitment, we're talking about diversity, inclusion, belonging, right? Look, you can look at John Powell's work and the importance of that. But where should they go, right? What are the sectors that people should be looking at right now if they want to make this career change, if they want to, get to a good company? Which ones are tightening up? Which ones are opening up for them out there? Jerry, what are your thoughts? And then I'll pass it on to both of you before we wrap up here tonight. Jerry?
Okay, so just a very quick comment on diversity, that in a very real sense, this is being driven by the market, because the generations that are entering the labor force or millennials who are already in the labor force are much more diverse than previous generations. So if you're looking for talent and you have really no choice. And so I think we've got those market forces that work there. In terms of sectors that are growing, anything that has to do with technology, that drove the California economy to be one of the fastest growing economies in the country, in spite of what they think back east, and resulted in California this year of being the fastest growing economy in the United States. And that's driven by technology. But if someone doesn't have those skills, you have construction, which is begging for people to come in, and the technical part of construction as well, construction management and the like. So those are the growth areas that we're seeing. And then finally, in logistics, we're finding that moving goods around and solving supply chain problems are important, and that's a real growth area. So those are the really tight markets. I think Caroline mentioned professional and business services earlier. That is quite a tight market now. And in some aspects of it in California, employment has grown in the last year to be more than 10% above where it was in 2019. So these are the real tight markets.
But when I hear from my friends in Texas, they all say, oh, your business is out there in California, you tax everybody so much, move, and in fact, they don't have income tax, right? They have high property taxes, but they don't have income tax. Why don't those businesses relocate? You hear from Elon Musk. I mean, is that, are those sentiments really affecting employment opportunities for folk during this period?
It really depends on what kind of job, and we've been talking about what kinds of jobs are being offered. But the California economy in the first 3 quarters, this is the only data we have so far in 2021, was the fastest growing economy in the country. Texas grew slower than the US. So there's a narrative there, but it's not the correct narrative. But what you do find in Texas Look, my family originally came from Texas, so I'm not a Texas basher. But what you do find is large-scale manufacturing and other jobs that require lesser skills and require more land. So you get less expensive labor and less expensive land. And that should be there and not in Los Angeles or San Francisco, where you have expensive land and expensive labor. So that's the kind of sorting that we naturally see in the economies.
Awesome. In the last minute or so that we have, Katya and Carolyn, where do you see the opportunities for our alums if they want to make these career transitions?
Well, first of all, I hear what Jerry's saying about sector. I would say that Korn Ferry, we're all divided by sector. There's not one sector in our business right now that isn't doing well and that isn't like growing leaps and bounds. And that means that we're being hired by clients to do either leadership development with them or recruiting. So I would look more equally at who are you, what do you want to do, and what companies mirror that, and what companies do you think you would want to work for because you've either read about them or used your UCLA Great Network to find out what companies some of your alums are working with and which ones do they love and why. Ask them why they love it and listen to them and see if that matches up with who you are.
Awesome. Katya, final word.
Well, I think that, my advice would be to not necessarily, target a specific industry because your skills are transferable. But I think to find a company and a culture that, and perhaps a purpose and a mission that resonates with you, and to really do a little bit of, soul searching about what you want your work and your career to look like, what's important to you, and then kind of work backwards from there. And then from there, try to see, what sort of companies, what kind of industries, because there are different things that different people value. I mean, I'd say half of my friends are lawyers, right? They're like, I don't really care about the culture, Katya. You know what I mean? They're like, what's my, what my billable hours, right? So, and I'm like, okay. And then there's some people who, for them, it's, it has to be somewhere where they can be creative. So it really depends, I think, on the person. But I would say, figure out what matters to you, right? Figure out what it is that will make you thrive in your work life. And from there, you can look at industry and then company and some of those things, but always remember that you're not stuck in an industry. You can always the skills are transferable, and through your UCLA network, you could potentially make that transition.
Use your network. That's right. But before our panelists leave, I want to make one announcement and would love to encourage you all to apply to serve on our UCLA Alumni Association Board of Directors or as alumni representatives to select campus boards. Currently, our Alumni Association is seeking passionate Bruins, right? The Great Resignation. We're seeking talent who can bring their expertise, strategy, and thought leadership, as well as optimism to help drive our association's vision and future forward. To learn more and apply, applications are due by March 1st. Please visit our UCLA Alumni Association website. Recruitment is open until March 1st. And we have a number of director positions open, as well as officer positions and alumni representative positions to the Undergraduate Student Association Council, as well as the John Wooden Center Board of Directors. Again, I invite you to consider serving as a passionate and incredible alum here at our UCLA Alumni Association. I want to thank our three incredible guests tonight. You have been so generous with your time, your talent, and your wisdom with our UCLA alumni community. Thank you, Jerry, Caroline, and Katya, for your leadership in the field. And we invite you all to continue to reach out to us, send us your questions, let us know what you're interested in hearing more about, and we'll plan the next town hall based upon your recommendations. With that, again, I am your UCLA Alumni Association President, D'Artagnan Scorza. I wish you a good night and go Bruins.